Hello, good evening and welcome to another episode of Vantage Point. I'm your host Nadim Majid and joining us is Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka. Dr. Jayatilleka, thank you for joining us again
back
on
from
Vantage
Delhi, right?
Back from Delhi, exactly. Dr. Jayatilleka, the local political scene is heating up a little bit. There's been a lot of talk about common candidates for upcoming presidential elections, and in the midst of all this there was a meeting recently that has captured the headlines of almost every newspaper. A meeting between the present opposition leader, Mr. Wickremesinghe, and the former president, Madam Chandrika Kumaratunga. Dr. Jayatilleka, I'd like to start off by asking you, what's your take on this meeting and what was discussed? What do you think they would have discussed? What was the intention of holding this meeting at this juncture with provincial council elections just around the corner?
Well, I think it was a good effort, but very bad optics. It didn't look right. It didn't sound right. But the content of the report that President Kumaratunga presented was good. I mean, there is a serious problem of religious extremism and hate speech, the physical targeting of places of worship of those who belong to a variety of religions adhered to by the ethnic and religious minorities in the country. So there is a problem, despite the government's disclaimers or protestations. And it's good that Chandrika, as a former president, engaged with this issue, albeit a little late, but she's known to be a little late most of the time. So
apparently not. I heard that she was early.
She was early for the meeting with Ranil. yes, 10 minutes early for the meeting with Ranil. Well, that's a paradigm shift, but this is a serious issue, and it's good that a distinguished citizen took it upon herself to make some kind of effort on this issue. However, one would have to be very naive, and the people of Sri Lanka are not that naive, not to wonder about the timing of this. It's the middle of an election campaign in the Western Province. The UNP is being led from the front, just as the SLFP is being led by President Jayatilleka. The UNP is being led by Ranil. In this campaign, he has not left it to his candidates. And in the middle of this election, former President Kumaratunga pays a call on Ranil Wickremesinghe at his headquarters and hands over the report to him and has a photo up. Now, why on earth would she hand the report over to a leader of a political party to start with? This is something that has to be dealt with primarily at the level of civil society. That's point one. Point two, if she were meeting party leaders, she should have waited till she got the appointment from the leader of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, the president.
This happens to be her party as well.
Yes, she's a member of that party. Her dad founded it. And she should have kicked off with the president. And if he didn't grant her an interview, well, then she could have said something about it and then moved on to the next person. She might have even tried meeting the general secretary of the party, Mr. Maithripala Sirisena, instead of which she somehow thought that it was sufficiently urgent
to hand this report over to the opposition.
To hand this report over. It's like she had this report and she was waiting to hand it over, and Maitha Rajapaksa was too busy or ungracious or whatever. He says that she didn't ask for a date. But and then she rushes off and meets Ranil and hands this. It doesn't come across right. I mean, in the middle of an election campaign, Chandrika walks into the UNP den, meets Ranil, gives a report over, talks to the press. It's a little weird. Furthermore, that particular meeting was not attended by the head of the leadership council of the United National Party, Mr. Karu Jayasuriya. Now, Mr. Karu Jayasuriya has been talking about and against religious extremism much before Chandrika. I mean, Chandrika came in late on the issue. It's good that she came in at all. And of course, she's more heavyweight, so to speak, than Karu, because she's a former president. But still, Karu Jasure is a liberal Buddhist who is opposed to extremism of any sort. He was not at the meeting. The meeting had on the side of the UNP an interesting collection of people. You had Ranil, Mangala Samaravira, Tisata Nayaka, Ravi Karanayaka, and Ruan Vijayavardhana. I mean, this is basically these are the Ranilistas, and this is the Ranil and the gang that couldn't shoot straight, kind of, it's that crew. And Chandrika should have requested Karu's presence. If he were busy, she should have settled for a date on which he could have been present.
Well, if you have the General Secretary and several members of the Leadership Council present at this occasion, which is a fairly important occasion as they made it out to be, you wonder why the chairman of the Leadership Council was not present.
I know, I do. And but I mean, that's the third thing I wonder about. The first thing I wonder about is what was she doing for 2 years? Secondly, why did she choose to hand it over to political parties rather than civil society? She could have had a big conclave, civil society conclave. 3, why the UNP before her own party? What was so urgent that she couldn't wait for her party to give her an appointment? And 4, how come it was just one faction, the dominant faction of a divided UNP that she met? So it leads me to think that there was something other than or together with or alongside the sincere desire to do something about the manifestation of religious hate speech and extremism. She seemed like she was sort of in the middle of an election campaign giving a signal of some sort. A photo op with the UNP leader who is canvassing for votes. I wonder whether she was trying to secure the endorsement of Ranil for some political project, or make it clear to the UNP voters, hey, I'm one of you guys, or one of you, to bridge a gap. It didn't seem right.
So what you're basically saying is you can put the politician into civil society, but you can't take the politics out of the politician.
The bad politics in this case. I mean, this wasn't a show of very smart politics. No.
Dr. Jayatilleka, I'd like to ask about another topic that has captured headlines, and again it involves Madam Kumaratunga and also another person, Venerable Madhuru Sobhitathera. There's talk of the common candidacy for the common candidate for the presidential elections, which a lot of people are expecting will come next year. There are some lines that are being drawn among the opposition. You get some who support the Venerable Thera for the candidacy, and you also have supporters of Madam Kumaratunga. Where do you see this whole thing going? Is this going to end up in an opposition in shambles come presidential election and clean sweep for the UPFA again?
Well, I mean, if they continue to be silly, I can't rule that out.
Elaborate on silly.
Well, I mean, in which country does anybody put forward a member of the clergy as a common opposition candidate? I mean, and somebody who doesn't have a political background. In Paraguay, you had a former bishop, Lugo, who won, but I mean, he was a former bishop, and he had been associated with politics for a long time. I mean, there's no way that the people of Sri Lanka, I know most countries in the world, are going to vote for a monk to be the leader of the country, even if it's for one day before he abolishes the presidency. I mean, that's one. 2, why abolish the presidential system? As a political scientist, I mean, I defer to the Thero and anyone in matters of their expertise and competence. But I'm afraid I find it very difficult to defer to anyone in this discussion on matters of political science. Even Madam Kumaratunga, who occasionally claims to be a political scientist. Look, take the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the UN Security Council. 4 of them have presidential systems. The United States, Russia, China, France. 1 does not, and that's Britain, with the parliamentary system, the Westminster system.
But again, if you take those 5 members, their systems, while they have presidential systems, it's very different to ours, whereas we have a somewhat bipartite system. They're all 5 of those countries, even Britain, being a parliamentary democracy, has elements of a tripartite system where you have an executive that is completely removed from the legislature. And Britain also has that kind of, so in that way it's slightly different to Sri Lanka, don't you think so?
Well, the institutional balance, the separation of powers, operates differently in each of these systems. Certainly the Russian presidential system is a fairly powerful one. When the Sri Lankan presidential system was unveiled, one of our most outstanding political scientists, Professor A.J. Wilson, called it a Gaullist, Bonapartist system, so more in line with the French system. I think the problem here is not the presidential system, it's the fact that there is such a steamroller majority in the parliament. So, I mean, if you have a problem in your tummy, you don't need to take Panadol for a headache. The presidential system, today's presidential system, would look very different if you had the 17th Amendment in place with the independent commissions. That's what you need to do. And to do that, you have to alter the balance in Parliament. Now, if somebody tells me that it's not possible to win a parliamentary election when you have this very powerful presidential system, my point is what happened in the North. I mean, you not only had the same powerful presidential system, the same 18th Amendment, you also had 80,000 troops. But the opposition, the TNA in this case, got 78.8% of the vote. That's very close to 80%. So, I mean, you know, you can win an election very handsomely if you have the right kind of political leadership.
In the case of the Northern Province, Dr. Jayatilleka, couldn't you also argue that the voting was on ethnic lines, which...
Well, nothing, I mean, there's nothing that prevents it's not inevitable that all the Sinhalese or most of the Sinhalese should vote for the government. They do so only because they don't have an opposition that they can vote for. If you look at the political history of our country, it has usually been the case that the Sinhalese have been divided almost 50-50. It is only in the present situation where you have a president who won a war and an opposition which is discredited as having been on the wrong side of that war, that you have this tectonic shift. But that can shift back. It can easily shift back. It's rather like the argument about the 2005 election in which Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa was elected president. The argument on the side of the opposition is, look, Belupilla Prabhakaran called for a boycott, and that's how Mahinda Rajapaksa won. Yes and no. Belupilla Prabhakaran didn't say, look, if you're going to vote for Mahinda Rajapaksa, then you stay home. But if you're going to vote for Ranil Wickremesinghe, you come and vote. No. He boycotted. It was a blanket boycott. I mean, he didn't say if you're going to, he didn't say the other either. If you're going to vote for Mahinda, it's okay, you come and put your vote. But if you're going to vote for Ranil, you stay home. No. He didn't intervene in that at all. It was a blanket, zero exception boycott of the Tamil people of the north and parts of the east. Why is it that it affected only one side and not the other? Because Mahinda Rajapaksa was not dumb enough to put himself in that line of fire. He didn't count on a vote from that area as being decisive. He counted on winning the majority of the majority. And it worked. Therefore, he didn't take the hit. His opponent did. So it's the same thing here. If there is a fact of nationalism, there's only one reason why it has become a monopoly of the government. And that's because nobody's competing. Or those who are competing are not competing on for that center space. And that's what it's about. So you can win an election. The problem is not the presidential system. I'd go further and say that right now, when Sri Lanka is caught in a kind of a pincer on its western flank and also on its northern neighborly flank with Jayatilleka's saber rattling, it is necessary to have a strong center. So you need the presidential system. Look at Britain today. Scotland is about to have a referendum on whether it's going to be a part of the UK or not. And it's because it's a Westminster system that not much can be done about it. But in any country with a presidential system, it's usually more difficult to break away. I don't think Sri Lanka can afford, at this point in history, to decenter our political system and revert to a parliamentary system in which you might have the TNA having the controlling share. And right now, I don't consider the TNA an enemy at all. I don't regard it in a hostile way, but it's all over the place. I mean, it's a very volatile party of moderates, if it's a party of moderates. I don't think that we can run the risk of a parliament in which a controlling share would be with the TNA MPs. And that's what would happen if you abolished the presidential system and reverted to a Westminster model. I don't think the people of this country are going to take that risk. So this whole idea of a common candidate who would come in and perform harakiri, or if you want to go sort of very Jataka stories, do a Sirisangabo and sort of self-decapitation. I don't think that this is the time for that kind of thing. And I don't think the voters are going to take kindly to it.
Do you think that if either of these candidates, Madam Kumaratunga or Venerable Sobhita Thera, if either of these candidates do get the candidacy of the opposition, of somewhat united joint opposition, will they be able to provide a contest?
No. I don't think so. It would be a pity, because I think I would like to see a real race at the presidential election. I mean, I still think that Mahinda Rajapaksa has an edge because of the legitimacy derived from his wartime performance, and also because of his personal appeal, which you can see at work in this campaign. It's still there. He hasn't lost his mojo. Outside of elections, he does, but when it's election time, he switches on. He's no longer unplugged. He's switched on. So he'll probably win, but it needs to be a serious race, because then you might have a knock-on effect at the parliamentary election. And the parliament, as I always say this, it's been around for 20 years. You can change that, but only if you have a good bowling run-up in the presidential election. But if you take I don't even want to waste your time talking about Reverend Sobhita as a candidate. 50,000, 25,000 votes, 50,000 votes. I mean, Colin De Silva couldn't get more than, I think he got 25,000 or 50,000 after 40 years in politics. I mean, come on. So this is not serious. But President Kumaratunga, now that's different. I remember a public opinion poll a few years ago when I was serving either in Geneva or in Paris. I can't remember when. And I believe it was by the Center for Policy Alternatives, Dr. Sarvanmuthu's CPA. Anyway, it was by a reputed NGO or think tank, nothing to do with the government. And it had a list of names. It was a kind of a public opinion thing. It was a public opinion poll. And I was struck by the fact that President Kumaratunga polled a fraction of what a couple of dead presidents and prime ministers had got. I mean, D.S. Saranayake was vastly more popular than she was. And there's nobody alive really, or very few, who remember D.S. Saranayake. And President Ranasinghe Premadasa got, several 100% the vote that she got. I think she had about 5%. This was a few years ago. don't think it's a serious prospect. I mean, she possibly was trying to woo the UNP voter, but it's a dwindling UNP, it's a divided UNP. She'll probably get the Ranil faction's vote. She won't get the other guys. The UNP will find it much too dissonant, to vote for Chandrika. I mean, they remember, they remember Vamba and so many things. And she was the Bandaranayakas, the UNP, fourth Bandaranayakas for decades. So, I mean, it's not going to work. It's going to be still hovering along the lines of 5. Well, the percentage of the singular vote is going to be very small. And she came in on exactly the wrong issue. I mean, it was possibly, if she were politically inclined, possibly this was to start off with the religious and ethnic minorities. The ethnic minorities would vote for the UNP anyway. That's the calculation of the UNP. She probably wanted to add the religious minorities to the opposition.
But judging by the party's performance at the Northern Provincial Council, you could argue that it's a miscalculation.
No, but at a presidential election, unless they feel their own candidate, they would vote for the opposition candidate. So this was probably an attempt to put the religious minorities in as well, which will work at the rate the government is abusing Mr. Rauf Hakim. I mean, it's very stupid. But the crucial factor is the percentage of the singular vote. And in a situation in which you have the rise of a pan-Tamil nationalism from the Tamil diaspora in the West through to Tamil Nadu, looping through the north of Sri Lanka, then you are bound to have a pan-singular nationalist backlash if one candidate represents a patchy record on the Tigers, is not seen as a nationalist, and the other has a sort of a clean track record on that, a good track record. So then you will have a pan-singular backlash. In other words, whatever percentage you start off with the minority votes, the wrong kind of candidate, and Chandrika is the wrong kind of candidate, Ranil is the worst kind of candidate, would see a massive compensatory shift of singular votes to a president who already starts with quite a few singular votes. So that's not going to work. The only thing that can work is if you have a reversion to the status quo ante, where the singular vote is more or less divided evenly. And that can be done only if you have a more liberal nationalist. It has to be liberal because, I mean, you don't need a Mahinda Rajapaksa clone, but you need somebody who can compete on that terrain. So you need somebody who represents a more inclusive, pluralist vision of the country and for the country, but it has very solid singular, I might even say singular Buddhist credentials. The shadow candidacy won't work because if you look at it from the point of view of political science, you can beat somebody who led a war successfully, but only if you're a certain kind of candidate or you have a certain profile. Now, Churchill lost in 1945, and I've heard the UNP say this over and over again, but Churchill lost to Clement Attlee, who was the Labour leader who was part of the wartime patriotic cabinet, the coalition. Churchill did not and would not and could not have lost to Chamberlain, who was seen as an appeaser of Hitler, which is the situation that we will have. And I'm not really talking about Chandrika, I'm talking about the existing choice of people. So you can't really beat a president or prime minister who has won a war and has those credentials when that's still an issue. It's still an issue because of what's happening in the world outside, the targeting of Sri Lanka, the threats from Jayatilleka. So it's not that that period of history is over. It's been stretched, it's been extended by those who are bringing pressure to bear on Sri Lanka. Therefore, nationalism or patriotism, or it's still a salient factor. It's an emotive factor. It's even a touchstone. Who will protect us? Who is the strong leader? Who can get us out of this? And get us out of it while preserving our self-respect. not while appeasing. So you need a kind of candidate who can do that. And these people are not. I mean, take de Gaulle. De Gaulle made the iconic comeback, but that's because he was seen to represent the entire spirit of France in the resistance to fascism.